Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the United Nations Bookshop. Excellencies, distinguished guests, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to our Meet the Author event and jazz concert, which is a big first, in honor of the book Art Kane, Harlem, 1958. It is a pleasure for us to host the author, Mr. Jonathan Kane, and our colleagues, Ms. Lala Moore and Mr. Chris Maxfield, from the UNSRC Jazz Society. My name is Sherry Aldis, and I'm the Chief of United Nations Publications in the Department of Global Communications. Welcome to those watching us on Facebook Live today. Please feel free to like and share the video on the UN Publications social media. The hashtags that we're using are not on the screen, but we do use the hashtag UN Bookshop, so please don't hesitate to use that. We'll be together this afternoon for about an hour, starting with 25 minutes of conversation about the book between Jonathan and Lala, and you will have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have following that before we do move on to the musical portion of our event. And after that, you will have an opportunity to have your book signed. Jonathan has kindly agreed to stay, and the books are available for purchase at the cash desk at the front of the shop. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à la Librairie des Nations Unies. Nous sommes heureux de vous accueillir aujourd'hui pour une discussion autour du livre Art Kane, Harlem 1958. C'est un vrai plaisir pour nous d'accueillir l'auteur, M. Jonathan Kane, ainsi que nos collègues du UNSRC Jazz Society, Ms. Lala Moore et M. Chris Maxfield. Nous serons ensemble pendant environ une heure pour entendre plus sur l'histoire de cette photo de jazz légendaire sur un plan culturel et historique, et bien sûr participer au premier concert de jazz tenu à la Librairie des Nations Unies. Nous allons continuer en anglais, mais n'hésitez pas à intervenir en français lors de la partie interactive si vous le souhaitez. Before passing the floor to Lala to kick us off, I'd like to briefly introduce today's guests. So Jonathan Kane is Art Kane's son. He began his career as the 15-year-old drummer of the Kane Brothers Blues brand, touring the US, opening for blues legends Muddy Waters, James Cotton, Willie Dixon, and others. He has recorded over 60 records with Lamonte Young's Forever Bad Blues Band, Reese Chatham, and leads his own minimalist blues band, Jonathan Kane's February. Jonathan is the author of Art Kane, Harlem 1958, which is a visual history of his father, photographer Art Kane's iconic image, commonly known as A Great Day in Harlem, capturing a unique moment when 57 jazz musicians gathered outside of Brownstone in Harlem, New York. Art Kane was one of the most widely published photographers of his time, appearing in magazines such as Life, Vogue, and Esquire, and his images ranged from conceptual fashion editorials to portraits of musicians like Bob Dylan, The Who, and Janis Joplin, as well as political imagery that could be interpreted as a form of activism during the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. His photographs are in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art and the Metropolitan Museum. I would also like to welcome our colleagues Ms. Lala Moore and Mr. Chris Maxfield, who will be participating in the conversation with Jonathan and with you, as well as performing in the jazz concert. So Lala Moore is an American editor and writer, my colleague and a UN staff member in the Department of Global Communications since October 1991. She's the senior editor of one of our most important publications, Basic Facts About the United Nations, as well as the former UNSRC Jazz Society president and a member since 1993. Chris Maxfield is a lover of jazz who has enjoyed a 20-year career as a U.S. Army officer, serving all over the globe, and subsequently an 18-year career with the United Nations in peacekeeping, UNICEF, and the Department of Safety and Security. He is now retired and devoted to the study of jazz, of course. Thank you both for joining us today, and Lala, over to you.
Thank you, Sherry. So I spoke with Jonathan on Friday, and we realized that this presentation is sometimes an hour, hour and a half, so he's trying to whittle it down to 25 minutes, so which is a huge undertaking. So I've jotted down some notes and interesting things that he mentioned in our conversation, and he's going to go ahead and start with the presentation, and as we go along, I can interject things if he doesn't mention those things that were discussed before.
I missed the good stuff. Yeah.
Make sure you capture all the good stuff. And also, we can wish him a happy belated birthday because he celebrated a birthday earlier this month. So a round of applause just for Chris. 5 another year. And without further ado, I'll turn it it over to Jonathan.
Okay, well, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks to everyone who made it happen. And I'm going to get right to the picture that we're all here to talk about, and that is. Wait, what happened? Are we
There?
up?
Is it up?
Renee?
No.
No. Oh.
Now it's time for me to start singing, right?
It's supposed to be on here. Which one do you want? That one. Is that up there now?
No.
Yes.
The famous picture? No,
Yeah.
it's a picture of your father's.
Yeah, right. It's supposed to be. It's not what's up here. So the cover's up, right?
Covered up. Yeah. Cover. Yeah. Convex.
Right. But I'm not understanding why. You know what? Let me try another approach here.
So should
How about that?
There it is.
Got it?
No. Yes?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So, technical difficulties. So, in August 1958, my dad, Art Kane, was not yet a professional photographer. He was an art director. He had been working at 17 magazine. He'd been working at a Mad Men era ad agency called the Irving Server Agency, and but he was looking to transition into.
It's gone.
It's gone.
Is it a white screen? Is it a white screen now?
Yeah.
So whatever's here.
I don't.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So. Okay. So he had word from the community, the publishing community in New York, that Esquire magazine was planning a big issue dedicated to jazz. They were going to put it out in the January 1959 issue, and it was going to be a celebration of jazz for mainstream America that read Esquire magazine. So my father thought that it could be a great way to launch his career by cooking up a kind of a crazy idea to create a group portrait, kind of like a class picture as it were, and try to make a call for all the biggest names in jazz they could possibly get. He went in and pitched his idea to Esquire editor Harold Hayes, and art director at the time was Robert Benton. Benton went on to become a major Hollywood film director himself. Those two gentlemen signed off on the idea. They said, great, we'll book a studio, at which point my father said, no, absolutely not. It was not going to be in the studio. This has to be on location, and it has to be in Harlem, because Harlem is where jazz has its home in New York City, and many of the musicians that we're going to want to have either live there or play there. The best clubs are there, Minton's and Birdland, and yeah, So at that point, Benton and Harold Hayes got a little nervous because they thought, how are we going to control this? At this, anything can happen with the location shoot, including bad weather and any other kinds of distractions. But they decided to sign off on it, and so at that point they began the process of scouting the location and then also recruiting and putting the word out to the music community. Through a network of record companies, agents, music writers, union reps, and at that point they
It goes by word of mouth.
it was word of mouth, yeah.
Okay, so
And-
traveled around.
And at that point, yeah, they had no idea like who would show up or how many. I think my father had said he was hopeful that they might get maybe 15, maybe 20 people showing up. So also one of the things that was of note was the call time was 10 a.m. which is pretty early for jazz musicians. One of the musicians in the photograph was noted as saying that he didn't know there were 2 10 o'clocks in a day. So my dad and his assistant and some people from Esquire showed up at the location at 17 West 126th Street in Harlem, and got there probably around 8:30, 9 o'clock, and waited for people to show up, and then were just absolutely thrilled and amazed.
How did they decide on that location?
Well, that's a good question. I think that it's a northern side of the street, and so it has the southern exposure, so it has better light. I think that they liked that location for its proximity to public transportation. There's a subway, the Park Avenue elevated train's not far away, and just being behind 125th Street, it's kind of very centrally located in Harlem.
Oh.
Yeah. So we'll move along to some of the other pictures. These are the contact sheets. So getting to flash forwarding a little bit to where we are now. Last summer was the 60th anniversary of this photograph, and so together with the publisher Guido Harari and his Wall of Sound gallery and Wall of Sound editions in Alba, Italy, we decided to do a book. Would be a deep dive into all of the outtakes surrounding the photograph and sort of take a look at how it all unfolded. And there's a kind of a cinematic quality to seeing these images, which, was questionable what Art Kane would think about it. My father was all about his main picture, his choice. He wasn't so big on outtakes, but in the case of this picture, I think they're important to be seen because this photograph is more than just his vision, even though he made it happen, it was his idea, but this photograph is very much belongs to the 58 great men and women who showed up that morning to share their talent and their passion for their art form.
Okay, can you tell me what is an outtake?
Well, outtake are sort of all these other pictures that we're seeing that are as a photographer shoots, he or she will shoot many, many frames. Now in digital age, even hundreds, even thousands of frames. And then in the editing process, narrow it down to the one very best picture. So an outtake is all the
other stuff.
Other stuff, yeah,
Okay.
Exactly. So, so these are the contact sheets, which are kind of amazing to look at. And we'll get into close-ups of some of them as we move along. I'm going to move kind of quickly, so feel free to hit me with any questions you might have while we move.
Let's go.
Yeah. I'm going to jump right to this one. This is the pesky one that kept coming up when I was trying to show you. This photograph is taken by the bassist Milt Hinton. Milt Hinton was one of the great and most recorded bassists in jazz at the time, and he was also himself a fine photographer. And he took this picture of my father across the street. He's in the white jeans and white shirt there, desperately trying to get the musicians to pay attention to him. And you can also see some of the other key players involved. The assistant Steve Frankfurt and Harold Hayes is there from Esquire magazine. But significantly, the woman standing in the front of the curb in the dress is holding a Super 8 camera in her hand, and that's Mona Hinton, Milt Hinton's wife. And Milt Hinton gave Mona a Super 8 camera that morning and just said, just point it and take some pictures and take some footage. And many, many years later, in the early 90s, Mona found the footage forgotten in a box in her basement in Queens.
Yes. And
her discovering that footage was the genesis of the documentary film by Gene Bach called A Great Day in Harlem, because Gene was friends with the Hintons, was having dinner with them, and Mona said, I found this footage in the basement of that day, that picture that was in Esquire, so that's how that came to be. Some of the outtakes are really fun as the day begins to unfold. Here you have the great Mary Lou Williams. And then up above, you've got the drummer, Sonny Greer, leaning out of the car, shaking hands with Lucky Roberts. And up above that is Gene Krupa, probably also saying hello to Sonny Greer. It's kind of remarkable. One of the amazing things about this photograph is the cross-generational aspect of it. In jazz, you have giants like Lucky Roberts and Willie the Lion Smith, and the drummer Zooey Singleton, who played with Louis Armstrong's Hot Fives and Sevens, up in the same photograph with younger generation musicians like Horace Silver and Art Blakey, Benny Golson, who we have been honored to be doing some of these presentations with. And Benny Golson is one of two musicians actually who are still alive from the photograph today. He's still out there performing. He's somewhere in Europe right now, probably hitting the stage as we speak. Yeah.
So you have the traditional jazz musicians with the modern jazz.
Yes, and kind of everything in between, you know, from big band musicians like Duke Ellington's band and Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young.
Amazing.
Yeah. So here we have some of the outtakes. You know, you see Jimmy Rushing, the great blues shouter, having a conversation with the drummer Joe Jones. I'm particularly fond of this picture of Thelonious Monk showing up, looking super, super great in those bamboo sunglasses. Wow. And behind him is Lester Young. And it's just fascinating watching the day unfold. Here's that one again with Jimmy Rushing, and he's holding an umbrella, which sort of gives some credence to the idea that it might have rained that day. And also the photograph has the quality of a black and white image that was shot in a nice neutral flat light. So it was overcast, which is any photographer will tell you is great. You don't have the harsh shadows of a bright sunlight day. So.
Just a question, why did your father decide to shoot black and white rather color? Because I understand that he was one of the pioneers of using color photography for these types of shoots.
Yeah, you're right. That's true. He was a pioneer of color photography, but when he decided the subject would be supported better by the black and white medium, he used that to great effect as well. And I think he probably chose it for the formal aspect of the group portrait. These images are of note because when we started the deep dive into the book, we realized that this is a different building that it's shot in. There was actually a second location chosen, and you can see that the curtains are down. They actually look different, and the proof of it is actually in this photo where you can see it's 52 East 126th Street. And I'm absolutely fascinated at the idea of this huge group of the giants of jazz all walking together like a big class trip across Madison Avenue
to the other location.
To the other location, yeah. And so that's fascinating.
I'm sure getting them to move was a huge undertaking just to get them to move.
Yeah.
You see them talking and laughing.
It's true.
Sharing with one another.
That seemed very much to be the case. I mean, Benny Golson talks a lot about how how it took a couple of hours just to begin to organize people because it had never happened before that all these artists were in the same place at the same time. So people were like, hey, how are you doing? How's your family? Who you've been playing with, and just catching up. And Benny also talks about a bar on the corner, and apparently the bar was just caused some distractions from time to time.
Was there a piano in the bar?
I don't know. Speaking of instruments, one of the things that went out in the call when my father put the call out was not to bring your instruments. So he particularly asked the musicians not to show up with their horns, and one of them did. The trumpet player Rex Stewart actually did bring his trumpet, and there's one outtake. We might get a chance to see it later. It's all in the book anyway, of Rex blowing his horn while it's going on. But here again, you have that cross-generation. Here you have Sonny Rollins in the white jacket and the sunglasses, standing behind Coleman Hawkins. I mean, That's
Two giants of
two
jazz.
giants of the tenor saxophone from completely different generations. And
Right.
you know that Sonny Rollins was massively inspired by Coleman Hawkins. And to the left of Coleman Hawkins is the violinist Stuff Smith, who's I'm a huge fan of Stuff Smith. Here you have Willie the Lion Smith and Lucky Roberts. These are two great stride piano players. And Willie the Lion Smith actually is not in the actual photo
Oh, no.
because now there's two different versions of the story. Benny Golson says that he was off in the bar, but my father had said at the time that he had gotten tired and was sitting on the steps next door. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is going to be lost to history, and we can only, but we do know that Willie the Lion Smith was there.
He was there.
There were 58 musicians there, but only 57 in the photograph. And Willie the Lion Smith is in all of the other outtakes,
Okay.
but just not
So
that
he-
one classic shot. Yeah. So
I like the outtakes.
yeah, they're fun to see, right? I just also always point out when I'm on this one too that there's a guy standing to the left of the stairs whose wardrobe outfit is so modern. He's got on like cargo pants and a bracelet and this shirt, and he looks like he could be,
He could be now.
somebody right now, right?
Yeah.
He's walking around New York right now. So, how are we doing on time?
We're good. We're at
All right.
12 minutes in.
Okay, great. So we're doing all right. I love Mary Lou Williams standing next to Thelonious Monk. Thelonious Monk famously said that he positioned himself, well, there were two next to Mary Lou Williams and Marion McPartland, because he said, if I'm standing next to the two beautiful women in the photograph, more people will look at me. And he was right about that.
How many women are in the photo?
There are 3 women in the photograph. There's Mary Lou Williams, who was in a class by herself. I mean,
Yes.
which incredible pianist. She could outplay all the men on that stoop. And also an incredible composer and arranger, and so she was there. Also the pianist Marion McPartland and
Yes.
the singer Maxine Sullivan. You have these great moments here. Gene Krupa speaking to Roy Eldridge, and he's kind of seems to be really enjoying the fabric on Roy's jacket. This is also a great moment. I mean, if something like this were to happen today, and it has actually here at this location, there would be, the streets would be closed. There'd be, police barricades on either side. But here, the street was very much still open for business, and even the business in New York City at that time still being conducted with a horse-drawn cart. So there's a mattress cart going by, which is a great detail. And here you've got taxis and cars and another push cart. And it's just amazing to imagine that something like this was happening, but there was a lack of control. But I think that my father really wanted that kind of spontaneity, because it helped create something that was real and not controlled.
Right.
And later in his life, he was much more about controlling his subjects, and even the other jazz portraits that accompanied these in Esquire magazine, which we'll look at if we get a minute, reflect his pioneering of the art of conceptual portraiture. But for this one, the concept was the group.
Right.
And the fact that it happened at all is pretty amazing. Here's another Milton Hinton photograph. It shows my dad. I think I get the feeling that he's looking at the stairs and thinking like, it's time to start asking people to start moving up into the stairs. So this next image is from a children's book. There have been 2 children's books dedicated to this photograph. And this one is called Jazz Day. And they're showing the moment where my dad claims, he said that he took a New York Times and rolled it into a megaphone shape and used that to start to implore his heroes and heroines to begin to move up the stairs and start to create take the shape. He let everybody go where they were going to go on their own. There's some interesting juxtapositions, like all the drummers seem to have hung out together in one place, and a couple of the tenor players in another. But here I think people did start moving up into the stairs, and also some of the children from the neighborhood started showing up, and I think my father saw that as a fantastic addition to the photograph to create, a real feeling of community, and again, the future, representing the future. Here here's the drummer's corner up here. You've got Joe Jones and Gene Krupa, George Wetling and Sonny Greer. And you can't see him in this picture, but the great and magnificent Art Blakey is standing just up above. So let's see how we're doing. Okay, so I'm gonna skip right to this one. Are we on Dizzy Gillespie up front? Great. Okay, so here you see Dizzy Gillespie brought his own camera also, and I would love to have seen his pictures of it. In this one, you can see Dizzy is breaking off from the crowd to go across the street and get his own picture. And here's one of the outtakes that was shot on medium format. For you photography buffs out there, there were two formats used that day. One was 35mm Contax camera, neither of which belonged to Art Kane, because Art Kane wasn't really a professional photographer at the time. And the other was a medium format camera. It might have been a Mamiya, I'm not really sure. And there you can see on this one, from the medium format to the far right, Rex Stewart is playing his trumpet. And the one where there's like actually, and the reason Count Basie decided to sit down on the curb was apparently one of the kids kept teasing him and grabbing his hat away from him to run. So Count Basie would run back over and grab his hat back and come back over, and the kid would come and take it again. So finally Count Basie just decided, if you can't beat him, join him. Right. And decided to sit down with the kids on the curb. This is a screen grab from Mona Hinton's footage of my dad. I'm pretty sure from the arrangement of the people behind him that this is pretty close to when the actual photograph was taken. Right. And he looks like he's just finally checked things out and is moving back across the street to get his shot, at which point he moved up onto the top of the stairs and started again imploring for everybody to
get in place,
look and get ready and look at him, and then click, you hit the shutter, and that's the shot. This is the famous
now,
picture.
He took just one shot or several shots, and he chose this one? Or?
Yeah, so all those other ones we've been looking at are all part of the archive and are all in the book, but this was his choice. Okay. This picture, this is the one where it all came together, and it's easy to see why. I mean, for the shape is of the artist. The inverse T is perfect. Almost everybody is looking straight on the camera, and there's kind of fun things going on with Dizzy Gillespie sticking his tongue out at Roy Eldridge. Roy Eldridge complained at the time, "I'm the only one who's not looking at the camera because Dizzy was teasing me." We were always getting teased by Dizzy. That's the moment. We're frozen in time, which has now become an iconic piece of jazz history, and maybe even a little more, maybe even an actual piece of American history.
Right.
And so the book includes this diagram, which has everyone named, and then this frame is worth looking at for a couple of reasons. That's the cover of the original issue of Esquire, and the way the magazine spread appeared. Can't quite figure out why the art director, designer cropped it so hard to the left, with Gigi Grice actually missing the shot, but I think it might have been I think it may have been not wanting to have the gutter right down the middle of the frame. The reason I show that cover of Errol Garner's Concert by the Sea, there we go, back again, thank you, is the legend is that Harlem 1958 was Art Kane's first photograph. And in fact, it's only partially true. It's true that it was his first professional assignment, fully conceived, produced, and photographed. But in fact, he had been shooting and placing photographs for years before, After he was already an art director, he went back to the New School and was studying photography with Alexei Brodovich. Brodovich being the photographic guru to photo royalty like Richard Avedon, Irving Penn, and Diane Arbus. So at this point, anyway, my dad shot this cover of Concert by the Sea, which actually came out 3 years before Harlem, 1958. And it's probably a vacation photo. It's my mom on the cover. And they had met when she was a model and he was the art director at 17. So,
Right.
yeah. So.
Fantastic.
So no, I hate to be a myth buster, but Harlem 58, not really his first photograph, but his first big major shoot. And between that, when it appeared in Esquire in January '59, and these accompanying portraits that he took also as part of that essay,
Right.
he was on summer vacation from his art director job, and when this issue came out, he quit
I see.
and hung up his flag put out his shingle as a freelance photographer. So here you have Louis Armstrong photographed in Death Valley. The idea was pretty straight ahead. Louis Armstrong had a famous song about the rocking chair, and Art Kane wanted to take Louis Armstrong out of his normal environment of a performance venue or recording studio, or even a photography studio for that matter, and take him into a place of uncompromising natural beauty. So he chartered a 4-seat Cessna plane. Louis Armstrong did not like to fly, and when he did fly, he didn't like flying without his wife Lucille, but there was only 4 seats in the plane. So there was room for the pilot, Louis Armstrong, Art Kane, and the rocking chair.
Right.
And somehow or another, my dad convinced Louis Armstrong to get in, and then the result is kind of outstanding, particularly how the sun is setting
Right,
and just
yeah.
aligned so perfectly with his eye, and just this is the beginning of Art Kane's contributions as a conceptual photographer. Same with his portrait of Charlie Parker's Tombstone. He somehow managed to get a hold of Charlie Parker's saxophone and case, but he decided to remove the case from the saxophone as a visual metaphor for the sad fact that the bird had flown and Charlie Parker was no longer with us anymore. Also, just the fact that the saxophone case and the tombstone are the same shape is kind of a little bit eerie. These are 2 other images from that Esquire essay. Duke Ellington, again, a pretty straight-ahead concept. His famous song, Take the A Train. So any of you New Yorkers out there would know that to get the MTA to close down the subway, even for 15 minutes, was a big deal in 1958, as it would be today. So he got Duke Ellington on the front of an A train and had it stop between stations and crawled into the tracks and took this great shot of Duke Ellington.
Wow.
And to the left is Lester Young, photographed at Rye Playland in the Funhouse Mirror. And I think he was just referencing Lester's very sensual and expressive way of stretching notes when he would play. Yeah. So that's the jazz stuff. If we're doing okay with time, or 1:35. Okay, so what do we got left? Can we look at a few more things real quickly before we... Okay, so these are a collection of the many homages to Harlem 1958. There's literally dozens of them. The most famous one was Gordon Parks, the great American photographer Gordon Parks, did Greatest Day in Hip Hop, and he went back to the same building in 1998 and photographed hip hop stars there. For the 60th anniversary of the photograph, I photographed my own homage to the picture. I decided to not make it about musicians, rather to make it a celebration of multiculturalism and diversity and immigration in New York. I live in Queens, which is the most ethnically diverse, culturally diverse place on planet Earth. So I created my own Great Day in Queens here with 136 people from 66 countries around the world who make their home in New York City and borough of Queens. These are some of the children's books dedicated to it, and then we're just going to take a very quick look before we stop and take questions. at some of Art Kane's other contributions to the art form of photography. This is a very famous picture of the rock band The Who, shot for Life magazine in 1968. And again, he knew that The Who liked to wear British flags for clothes and drape their amps in them, so he literally decided to enrobe The Who in the Union Jack. He shot the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan, Cream with Eric Clapton, the blues band on a railroad track, Janis Joplin. This is Andy Warhol. He literally painted Andy. This is before Andy became Andy, and he was still doing shoes for I. Miller, and he was famous for using gold leaf paint, so my dad literally painted Andy gold. Here's Sonny and Cher in their swimming pool in Malibu. And then just a few more, Jefferson Airplane was the cover of Life magazine. That's Jim Morrison from The Doors, and Frank Zappa and the Mothers. And just I'll take a quick look and talk about Aretha Franklin that he shot for Esquire magazine. Again, his concept was Aretha is the queen of soul, but she came from a gospel background, so in order to illustrate that, he took a chance that if he slowed his shutter speed on his camera and moved the camera in a circular motion, that he might maybe create halos in her eyes, and it actually worked, and it made it work, yeah. So anyway, so that's, I think at that point we're about ready to start taking some questions, right? This is the building as it appears today. I shot this for the New York Daily News with my dad's vintage tripod, and when the baby and the mom and the baby stroller went by, that for me was like my moment, moving, as this, this space today, past, present, and future. So happy to take any questions.
Yeah, just so if anyone would like to ask a question to Mr. Jonathan Kane, please raise your hand. And for those who might be interested, there's also an interview with Jonathan on Jazz Times that came out on 14 December 2018 issue that is very interesting, and it covers this quite well in addition. All right, who's got a question here?
So
in the back, glasses. Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
So this photograph you just took with the woman pushing the baby carriage, when was that? How recently?
That was about 3 years ago. Yeah.
Because it looks homogenized.
Yeah, well, the neighborhood's changed. Yeah.
If you could just briefly introduce yourself when you ask a question, please. Thank you.
Thank you, I'm Colin Cable. Could you tell us, there are two notables that were absent, and it's been a lot of discussion about Miles Davis and Duke Ellington. Were they around? Were they not available? And the next one is that some people turned up late, including one of my favorites, Charlie Rouse and Ronnie Freer. Could you clarify that?
Well, it's true that there certainly were great artists who were not there. I think that can only be put to being on tour. I'm a musician myself, and I was once performing at a festival in Lisbon, Portugal, and I met Max Roach in the elevator. He was also at the festival. And after I finished having my moment of, of shaking in front of my hero, we talked about this photograph, and he was like, oh yeah, I wish I could have been in that picture, but I was on the road with Miles. So there you go. Yeah. And in terms of anyone who showed up late, I heard another story actually about the drummer Specs Powell, who got there early, but he was in the pit band for CBS television, and so he had to actually leave before the picture was taken. So you never know. You're either too early or too late or right on time. It's a toughie.
Hi, my name is Robert McPherson, and thank you for coming to see us, Jonathan. It seems to me that there's an unsung hero behind all these photos from Harlem 1958, and that's the lab technician. What do you know about the work that was done in the darkroom to make these pictures that are just technically formidably terrific?
Well, actually, there wasn't a lot of record keeping in the Art Kane studio about who his lab was. I know later he had his own dark room, but at this point he didn't even have he didn't have a studio yet. So I don't really know who the lab was that processed the film and created the contact sheets, but they did a good job with them for sure. And you always have to be lucky and. Because you put your film out there and you hope it comes back, right? And it's survived over the years beautifully, and but unfortunately I don't know who the lab was, but we're grateful for the good work they did for sure.
Another question? Don't be shy.
Well, I have done. I did a considerable amount of work in the automotive industry. I shot for Ford Motor Company and for International Trucks. So I was good with inanimate objects. Oh, well, not exactly inanimate, but they'd be moving, but they wouldn't be talking to me. So, yeah. I like.
Not human.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, I wanted to ask how long the shoot lasted, all in all.
I think from what I can tell from Benny Golson's recollections of the day, it was probably about maybe, 2 hours altogether, maybe an hour of just everybody saying hello and talking, and then maybe another half an hour of the format. But once people are in position and you start clicking, I'm sure it was all wrapped up within half an hour at that point.
Debbie, please.
Hi, I'm Debbie Goodrich of the UNSRC Jazz
Hi,
Society.
Debbie.
Hi, I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank
I
you.
I was just wondering, how many of your stories were from your father? How often did your father talk to you about it, and how many stories came from Benny Golson, or where did these stories originate? Because I think you were a child, right?
Yeah, I was not quite 2 at the time. And so it's a combination. I mean, my dad definitely would talk about this. It was a very formative experience for him. It was the day when he went home, he said, I knew I wanted to become a photographer at that point. But some of the other stories, come from some of the artists that I spoke to, some were still alive at the time of Gene Bach's film released. And in fact, that's one story I love to tell because it kind of relates to the family thing that, there's the drummer Eddie Locke was a young drummer who had just hit New York at the time. And he told me this at the premiere of the film. He said that he didn't know anything about it, but apparently his son was in nursery school with my older brother, Anthony. And so Eddie Locke and my mom were waiting to pick the kids up after school one afternoon in August, and they got into a conversation the way parents do, waiting for the kids, and my mom found out that he was a jazz musician, and she said, this weekend my husband is doing this big shoot for Esquire, and they're going to open call for you, you should go. And so he thanked her and got the information of the time and location. He told me that he got there at about 9:45, came around the corner and saw all of his heroes standing there, and he said his knees started shaking, and he nearly turned around and ran away, feeling like he didn't belong there. But then he spotted Horace Silver, who he had done a little playing with at that point, and in fact he's standing next to Horace in the photograph. I don't have a pointer here, but let's say from the far left of the image you've got Gigi Price, and I forget this next name, and then the third person in is Eddie Locke. And I just thought that was a cool little moment that he wasn't there because of a record company executive or a union rep or a record company or an agent, but because of a chance meeting with the photographer's wife, my mom, picking up their kids after nursery school. Yeah. Carol.
Okay. How much preparation did Art do to be able to do this photo? Was there a lot of preparation? Were there months? Were there days, weeks? And what kind?
I think it was really about a week and a half, from what my understanding is, that by the time Benton and Harold Hayes and Robert Benton signed off on it. They had maybe about a week and a half to pull it together. But all of the work went into the notifying the agents and just trying to get people out there. And amazing that they wouldn't really know who was going to actually show up. They had no idea. And then the location scouting probably took an afternoon of walking around and finding the right building. And I don't know if it was permitted. Now you can't do anything without a permit. You can't. So.
So a piece of history, in more ways than one, is a lost art in a sense.
Yeah, it's very true. And there's a lot of things we'll never know. People ask often about the children there, all those little boys sitting on the curb, and then people ask me why there are no little girls sitting on the curb. And I don't really have an answer for that, but a woman at one event said, I was that boy's age at that time, and I wasn't allowed to be out running around on the street. I had to be home, doing my homework and helping my mom out. So, but nobody knows who those kids are either. In this day and age, you'd have to have a model release, and you'd have to have parents sign off, you'd have everything. And now, in those days, it was just a little more freewheeling. Yeah. Okay.
That's it.
Well, no. Now we're going to move on to the musical performance portion of our event today. Can we get set up and move on to that?
I'm going to have UNSRC Jazz Society President give an announcement.
Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm Debbie Goodrich, the Vice President of the UNSRC Jazz Society. I want to thank Sherry and her team, Janet and Ever and her whole team for having us here to do this collaboration. And our whole purpose of the Jazz Society is to bring jazz to the UN community through conferences, through outings like this, and through live music. One thing I found, while they're setting up, I'll tell you the story. One thing I found is one of our newsletters from April 1995 showed an article about the Great Day in Harlem. So somebody was talking about the documentary. This was in April 1995. So I have a few copies, not many, but feel free to come and get a copy if you want. And now I'll turn the mic over to Lala and the UNSRC Jazz Society Workshop Band. We perform around the UN, we perform at private parties, retirement parties, and we just love to perform. We perform at staff day, and this is Lala Moore. She's one of the singers. Hee-Che Wu, he's a guitarist. Our bass player, Royson Thomas, he's our president of the Jazz Society. And on drums, we have David Simpson, with all staff members, and Hee-Che's from the Korean mission to the UN. So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
So if you would like a copy of the book sign, please feel free to come up, and Jonathan will be sitting at the table here. Thank you all very much for attending today.